In a quiet town, a retired K-9 named Bud embarks on a transformative journey, rekindling his warrior instincts, while his human companion, Sarah, confronts a bittersweet realization about purpose, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond they share. When Sarah takes her guide dog, Bud, to a training center, she uncovers a side of him long buried, his identity as a legendary service dog named Bravo. As Bud navigates obstacle courses with remarkable precision, Sarah grapples with pride and a poignant question. Is she fulfilling his needs as much as he fulfills hers? Their journey reveals a powerful truth about purpose, love, and second chances. Before we journey further into this unforgettable story, make sure you're subscribed to Epic Story Moments. Hit that bell icon now so you never miss an incredible tale. Join our community by liking, sharing, and commenting to keep these heartwarming stories coming. And hey, tell us where you're watching from. We love connecting with you all. The lush serenity of Central Park had always been Sarah Mitchell's refuge. She often occupied the same bench beneath the sprawling canopy of oak trees, letting the cool breeze caress her face as the distant laughter of children blended with the soft symphony of birds. Clutched tightly in her hand was the leather leash of Bud, her German Shepherd guide dog. For Sarah, Bud was far more than a companion. He was her protector, her eyes, her lifeline. Since the accident that robbed her of her sight 5 years ago, he had been her anchor to the world. But this afternoon, Bud's usual calm was nowhere to be found. His ears twitched with heightened alertness, his sharp eyes darting across the park, scanning for danger. Sarah sensed his unease and adjusted her grip on the leash, her heart quickening slightly. Across the park, a group of bikers laughed boisterously, their leather jackets gleaming in the sunlight. At their center was Hank McCoy, a burly man with a shaved head and tattooed arms that made him stand out even more. His piercing gaze fell on Sarah and Bud, and something about their serene presence irritated him. Hank flicked his cigarette to the ground with a smirk. "Look at that," he drawled, his voice carrying across the park. A princess and her perfect little dog. His companions chuckled, egging him on as he stepped away from his bike, his boots thudding heavily against the pavement. But noticed him immediately. His ears perked up, his body stiffening like a drawn bowstring. A low, menacing growl rumbled in his throat, and Sarah felt the tension ripple down the leash. She turned her head slightly, her senses on high alert as the sound of Hank's footsteps grew louder. "Nice dog you've got there," Hank said mockingly as he stopped a few feet away. "Does he do tricks? Maybe roll over or jump through hoops for us?" His tone was laced with malice, and Sarah's chest tightened. "Leave us alone," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. But Hank only grinned, his confidence swelling as he noticed the growing attention of onlookers. He clapped his hands loudly, trying to provoke Bud, whose growl deepened. "Oh, tough guy, huh?" Hank sneered, taking another step closer. Bud's piercing eyes stayed locked on him, unwavering, his body coiled with restrained power. Hank raised his foot slightly, feigning a kick. Gasps rippled through the small crowd that had begun to gather. Sarah's voice cracked as she called out, "Don't you dare!" Her grip on the leash was like steel now, her knuckles white. But Hank ignored her, his smirk widening as he leaned forward. "What's the big deal? He's just a dog," he said mockingly. What Hank didn't realize was that Bud wasn't just any dog. Before becoming Sarah's guide, he had been a highly trained K-9 military service dog, skilled in neutralizing threats and operating in dangerous environments. As Hank's foot inched closer, Bud's instincts kicked into overdrive. His growl grew deeper, his muscles tensing, ready to act. The air around them seemed to still, the park holding its collective breath. Hank's friends snickered nervously from a distance, their confidence wavering in the face of Bud's intensity. Hank hesitated for a fraction of a second, but his bravado pushed him forward. "Come on, Mutt. Show me what you've got," he taunted. And then, in a blur of motion, Bud sprang into action. He sidestepped Hank's feigned kick and barked sharply, his powerful frame planting itself protectively in front of Sarah. His sharp teeth gleamed in the sunlight as his bark echoed through the park, a clear warning that sent shivers down the spines of everyone watching. Hank stumbled backward, his cocky grin replaced by a flicker of uncertainty, but didn't move from his stance. His eyes locked on Hank with an intensity that promised swift retribution if the man tried anything further. "What the hell is this dog's problem?" Hank muttered, his voice losing its edge. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, some pulling out their phones to record the tense scene. Among them, a man in a park ranger uniform pushed his way through the gathering. "What's going on here?" the ranger demanded, his voice authoritative. He positioned himself between Hank and Sarah, his stern gaze locking onto Hank. Hank raised his hands defensively, taking a cautious step back. "Relax. I was just messing around," he muttered, though his bravado had all but vanished. The ranger's expression darkened. Threatening a guide dog isn't messing around. It's reckless and illegal. He turned to Sarah, his tone softening. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Sarah nodded shakily, her free hand reaching down to rest on Bud's head. "We're fine, thanks to Bud," she said, her voice quivering with a mix of fear and gratitude. As the ranger continued reprimanding Hank, an elderly man wearing a faded military cap stepped forward from the crowd. "That's no ordinary dog," he said, his voice steady and authoritative. The man's weathered face carried the weight of experience as he stepped closer to Sarah and Bud. "I've seen dogs like him in action. He's a hero." The murmurs of the crowd grew quieter, replaced by a sense of awe as the man's words sank in. Sarah knelt down beside Bud, her hand trembling as she stroked his fur. "Good boy, Bud," she whispered, tears welling up in her sightless eyes. "You're my hero, too." Hank, now thoroughly humiliated and outnumbered, mumbled an apology before slinking away, his biker friends trailing behind him. The park ranger assured Sarah that Hank would face consequences for his actions, and the crowd slowly dispersed, many offering Sarah words of comfort and admiration for Bud's bravery. As the park returned to its usual calm, Sarah sat back on the bench, her hand never leaving Bud's head. The connection between them felt deeper than ever. A bond forged not just by loyalty, but by unyielding courage and trust. The park buzzed with the usual hum of chatter and laughter, the golden rays of the sun spilling warmth over the scene. Sarah sat on her usual bench, the leash of her guide dog, Bud, wrapped securely around her hand. His sleek black coat gleamed in the light, and his alert, intelligent eyes scanned the surroundings with unwavering focus. He was her protector, her constant companion, the steady presence she relied on in her world of darkness. Today, though, that calm routine was shattered. The tension began with a gruff voice cutting through the cheerful ambience. Hank, a burly biker with an air of arrogance, had approached too close for comfort, his shadow looming over Sarah like a storm cloud. Bud's low, warning growl was the first sign something was wrong. "Control your dog, lady," Hank sneered, his bravado evident in every word. "He's not doing anything wrong," Sarah replied, her voice steady but edged with unease. Bud stood firm, his posture rigid, his sharp bark slicing through the air as Hank stepped closer. The crowd began to murmur, a mix of curiosity and unease spreading among the onlookers. Just then, a voice rang out from the group, a deep, commanding tone that demanded attention. "That's no ordinary dog," the older man said, stepping forward. His weathered face bore the marks of years spent in service, and his eyes held a knowing glint. He pointed directly at Bud. "I know that stance anywhere. That's a K9. The crowd collectively gasped, their whispers swelling. Even Hank faltered, his bravado cracking as the words sunk in. Sarah's brow furrowed in confusion as she turned toward the man, her hand instinctively tightening around Bud's leash. "What do you mean?" "He's my guide dog," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded slowly, stepping closer. "He might be your guide dog now, ma'am, but I'd bet money he served before that. That focus, that bark, It's instinct. The kind only a trained military dog has. The words hit Sarah like a wave. She crouched beside Bud, her trembling fingers running through his thick fur as if seeing him for the first time. "Bud," she murmured, her voice trembling with awe. Could it be true? The man continued, his tone steady but filled with reverence. "Dogs like him are heroes. They're trained for combat zones, to protect soldiers, to take down threats. If he's reacting like this, it's because he sees that man as a danger." His sharp gaze shifted to Hank, who visibly recoiled under the scrutiny. The biker's earlier confidence dissolved, his posture slumping as he muttered, "I didn't know." His voice was barely audible, the weight of judgment pressing down on him. The park ranger stepped in then, his tone firm and unyielding. "Ignorance doesn't excuse your actions. You're lucky this dog showed restraint." Bud finally eased slightly, though his vigilant eyes remained locked on Hank. It was as if he was silently ensuring the man didn't try anything else. The crowd erupted into a buzz of amazement, their attention riveted on Bud. To them, he wasn't just a guide dog anymore. He was a warrior. "You're done here," the ranger barked, gesturing sharply at Hank. The biker hesitated, glancing nervously between Bud and the older man who had unveiled the dog's remarkable past. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Call the cops!" Hank cursed under his breath, his tough guy act crumbling as he backed away. The ranger followed him, ensuring he left without causing further trouble. As the crowd slowly dispersed, a few lingered, their eyes still fixed on Bud with newfound respect. The older man lingered as well, his gaze softening as he looked at the dog. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quieter now but no less earnest, "you should know, dogs like him don't forget their training. It's buried deep, waiting for a moment when they're needed. And today, he thought you needed him." Sarah's heart clenched, tears prickling her eyes. She crouched beside Bud again, her hand trembling as it rested on his strong, steady frame. "You've always been my protector," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I never knew how far you'd go for me." Bud's ears twitched at her words, and he leaned into her touch, his ever-loyal gaze briefly softening before resuming its watchful stance. That evening, Sarah sat in her small, dimly lit living room, staring at Bud as he lay near her feet. The day's events replayed in her mind like a whirlwind. Hank's aggression, the revelation of Bud's past, the awe in the crowd's eyes. She opened her laptop, hesitating for a moment before typing the words "military K9 history" into the search bar. As she read through countless articles and stories, her understanding deepened. These dogs weren't just trained, they were soldiers. They detected threats, protected their handlers, and faced dangers most couldn't fathom. Closing the laptop, she slid to the floor beside Bud, her fingers gently brushing through his fur. "You've been through so much, haven't you?" she whispered. "I don't know what you've seen, but I know you've been saving me in ways I never realized." Bud shifted slightly, pressing closer to her, his quiet strength radiating through the room. The next day, Sarah made a call to a local veterans organization, recounting the encounter and asking if they could help uncover Bud's past. Many retired K9s are placed in new roles like guiding or therapy, the woman on the other end explained. It gives them a purpose after their service. The word purpose resonated deeply with Sarah, but hadn't just been helping her. He had been continuing his mission in life, protecting her in ways she couldn't comprehend. As the call ended, Sarah looked at Bud, her heart swelling with gratitude. He wasn't just her guide dog. He was her hero, her guardian, and now, a part of her story in a way she would forever cherish. Sarah knelt beside her loyal guide, Bud, gently running her fingers through his fur. His calm demeanor radiated comfort, his tail wagging ever so lightly in response to her touch. "We'll figure it out together," she said with a small smile, her voice carrying the weight of her gratitude for him. To her, Bud wasn't just her guide. He was her guardian, her partner, and her hero. Yet, despite the unwavering bond they shared, questions about his past lingered in her mind. A week had passed since the encounter in the park, but Sarah couldn't shake the haunting words of the older man who had stopped them. Asterisk, that's AK-9. He's trained for combat. Asterisk Bud had always been extraordinary. But now Sarah was confronted with the realization of how little she truly knew about him. She depended on him for everything, but suddenly felt a deep obligation to uncover the life he had lived before becoming her protector. One quiet afternoon, as Sarah prepared to take Bud for their usual walk, her phone buzzed. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something told her to answer. Heart pounding, she picked up. "Miss Mitchell?" A calm voice on the other end began. "This is Karen from the Veterans Organization. I've found some information about your dog." Sarah's breath hitched as Karen explained. "Your dog's military ID matches a retired K-9 named Bravo. He served overseas alongside a handler, Sergeant Jake Carter. They were deployed on multiple missions before Bravo retired." Hearing Bud referred to as Bravo sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. "Bravo," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Karen continued. "Sergeant Carter retired a few years ago and now lives in Montana. If you'd like, I can provide his contact information. He might be able to tell you more about Bravo's service." Sarah scribbled down the details, her hands trembling. After the call ended, she sat in silence, staring at Bud as he lay calmly by her feet. "Bravo," she whispered again, her voice filled with awe and uncertainty. The name carried a weight she couldn't yet comprehend, a history that seemed both distant and deeply personal. That evening, Sarah perched on the edge of her couch, staring at her phone. She had rehearsed what to say to Sergeant Carter over and over, but anxiety gripped her. What if calling him reopened painful memories? What if he didn't want to talk about Bravo? But as she glanced at Bud, her steadfast companion who had saved her life in countless ways, she knew she had to try. Summoning her courage, she dialed the number. The phone rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Hello? Hi, is this Sergeant Jake Carter?" Sarah's voice wavered. "My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I think I have your former K-9, Bravo." There was a long pause, and Sarah feared the line had gone dead. Then Jake's voice returned, heavy with emotion. "Bravo? Are you serious? I thought I'd never hear anything about him again." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she listened to the raw emotion in Jake's voice. "He's been with me for a few years now," she said softly. "I had no idea about his past until recently. He's saved my life in ways I can't even explain." Jake let out a shaky breath. "He saved mine too. More times than I can count. I need to see him." The days following Sarah's call felt like an eternity. Jake had insisted on flying out immediately, eager to reunite with Bravo. As Sarah prepared for the meeting, her mind raced with questions. Would Bud remember Jake? Would their reunion change the bond she and Bud shared? On the afternoon of Jake's arrival, Sarah waited with Bud outside her small apartment. The leash trembled slightly in her hands as Bud shifted his weight, sensing her unease. "It's going to be okay, Bud," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she was reassuring him or herself. A car pulled up, and Sarah heard the door slam. Moments later, a tall man stepped out, his movements deliberate yet tinged with apprehension. "Sarah," he called, his voice a mix of excitement and nerves. "Yes," she replied, her voice trembling. "And this," she gestured toward Bud, her throat tightening. "This is Bravo." At the sound of his old name, Bud's ears perked up. Jake froze, his eyes locking onto the dog. Slowly, he crouched down, extending a hand. "Hey there, boy," he murmured, his voice trembling. "Do you remember me?" The seconds stretched into eternity as Bud stood still, his body tense. Sarah held her breath. Then, almost imperceptibly, Bud took a cautious step forward, sniffing Jake's outstretched hand. His tail began to wag, and a low, familiar whine escaped his throat. Jake's eyes filled with tears as he gently stroked the dog's head. "You remember, don't you?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah watched, her own tears blurring her vision. She had always known Bud was special, but witnessing the bond between him and Jake brought a new depth to that understanding. Inside, Jake shared stories of their time together in the military. "Bravo was my partner on every mission," he explained. "He saved my life more times than I can count. He was fearless, but I never thought I'd see him again." As Jake recounted their adventures, Sarah felt a profound respect for both of them. The stories were filled with danger and sacrifice, but also love and trust. That evening, as Jake prepared to leave, he knelt beside Bud one last time. "You've got a good life now, boy," he said, his voice breaking. "I couldn't have asked for a better person to take care of you." Sarah's chest tightened at his words. "Thank you for trusting me with him," she said softly. Jake stood, offering her a small smile. "He's in the right place." As Jake walked away, Sarah looked down at Bud. "You've been through so much," she murmured. "But no matter what, you're home now." And in that quiet moment, Sarah realized that Bud's story wasn't just one of courage and loyalty. It was a testament to resilience, to the bonds that transcend time, and to the healing power of love. Sarah stood at the entrance of the sprawling facility, her hand lightly gripping Bud's leash as they took in the sight before them. The wide-open field stretched under a soft morning sun, dotted with clusters of retired K9s navigating obstacle courses or playfully interacting with handlers. The air buzzed with energy and purpose, a stark contrast to the quiet rhythm of their usual days. Bud's posture shifted, his ears perked, his tail wagging with a restrained enthusiasm that Sarah hadn't seen in a long time. For the first time, she wondered if this was the spark he had been missing. "Welcome to our training and enrichment center," a warm voice greeted. Sarah turned to see a middle-aged trainer approaching, her eyes kind and her stance confident. "You must be Sarah, and this handsome fellow must be Bud. Or should I say Bravo?" She knelt slightly, extending a hand toward Bud, who sniffed her with curious approval. "I read about his story. He's a remarkable dog." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and trepidation. "He's been my guide, my protector, and my partner. But I wanted to see if there's more I can do for him. He's given me so much, and I want to give something back." The trainer nodded thoughtfully. "You've already done more than most would, but it's wonderful that you're here. Dogs like Bud thrive when they can engage their instincts, even if just for fun. Let's see how he does." Sarah followed the trainer to one of the courses, her fingers brushing against Bud's fur as if to reassure herself as much as him. The setup was impressive: hurdles, tunnels, and scent tracking stations designed to mimic the challenges Bud might have faced in his military days. The trainer explained the process, her tone calm and encouraging. "We'll start simple, see what he remembers. No pressure, just positive reinforcement." Sarah unhooked Bud's leash, her heart racing as she watched him step forward. For a brief moment he hesitated, glancing back at her as if seeking permission. "Go ahead, Bud," she urged softly. "Show them what you can do." With that, something shifted in Bud. His stance firmed, his body moving with a fluid precision that took Sarah's breath away. He leapt over hurdles effortlessly, navigated the tunnels with confidence, and followed scent trails with an intensity that left a small group of onlookers in awe. The trainer clapped her hands lightly, her smile wide. "He hasn't forgotten a thing," she said, her voice tinged with admiration. "It's like he's back in his element." As Sarah watched, a lump formed in her throat. This was a side of Bud she had never truly seen, an echo of the warrior he had once been. Yet, as he finished the course and trotted back to her, his eyes seeking hers, she realized that this part of him hadn't been lost. It had simply been waiting, kneeling to meet him. Sarah stroked his fur, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're incredible, Bud. I hope you know that." The trainer approached, her tone more reflective now. "Sarah, it's clear he's deeply bonded with you, but giving him these moments to reconnect with his past will only strengthen that bond. If you're interested, we have regular programs he could join. He'd be surrounded by others like him, doing what they love, That evening, back at home, Sarah sat on the floor with Bud beside her, his head resting on her lap. The day's events replayed in her mind. The way Bud had come alive on that course, the joy in his movements, and the undeniable sense of purpose he exuded. She ran her fingers through his fur, her voice soft but steady. "I never want you to feel like you've left anything behind," she murmured. "You deserve every bit of happiness, Bud. You've given me a world I thought I'd never have, and now it's my turn to give you the same." The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to their lives. Sarah enrolled Bud in the enrichment program, balancing their familiar routines with visits to the facility. Each time, she watched with pride as he excelled, his confidence growing alongside his joy. But it wasn't just Bud who changed. Sarah found herself opening up more, inspired by the resilience and courage she saw in him. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point, the battles Bud had fought, the sacrifices he had made, and the unbreakable bond they had forged in the process. She leaned down, pressing her forehead gently against his. "You're not just my guide, Bud," she whispered. "You're my hero." Bud responded with a soft nudge, his calm presence grounding her in a way words never could. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. They would face it together, partners in every sense of the word. And in that moment, under the fading light of the evening sky, Sarah understood the true meaning of loyalty and love. It wasn't just about the past or even the present. It was about the promise of facing the future, side by side, no matter what it held. The trainer greeted Sarah warmly, her eyes lighting up as she knelt beside the stoic German shepherd. "This must be Bravo," she said, her voice laced with both respect and admiration. Bud, ever alert, shifted his gaze to the trainer, ears perking at the sound of his former name. She extended her hand gently, letting him sniff it before scratching behind his ears. "Let's see what he remembers." Sarah stood back, her hands fidgeting nervously as the trainer guided Bud through a series of tasks, tracking scents, navigating agility courses, and performing intricate commands with the precision of a dog still in active service. Sarah's heart raced as she watched Bud spring into action. Each leap, each turn, each deliberate move seemed to unleash a side of him she hadn't seen before. His focus was razor-sharp, his movements seamless, and his energy electric. It was as if he was no longer the gentle guide dog she knew, but a warrior reawakened. From her bench, Sarah's chest tightened. This wasn't just a glimpse into Bud's past. It was a vivid display of everything he once was. A part of her brimmed with pride, but another part felt an ache, bittersweet and raw. How much of this had Bud buried to adapt to his new life with her? The trainer returned, her face glowing with admiration. "He's incredible," she said breathlessly. "It's like he never left the field." Sarah nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She crouched beside Bud that evening, her fingers gently running through his fur. "You're amazing," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I never want you to lose this part of yourself. Whatever you need, we'll figure it out together." Bud nudged her with his nose, his quiet reassurance grounding her in the moment. For Sarah, this wasn't just about rediscovering Bud's past. It was about honoring it while finding a balance that gave them both peace. In the weeks that followed, their lives found a new rhythm. Every Saturday, they returned to the training facility, where Bud thrived in exercises designed for retired K9S. The open fields and obstacle courses became a sanctuary, a place where Bud could reconnect with his old self. Watching him navigate the courses with such precision filled Sarah with pride, but it also deepened her understanding of who Bud truly was. One afternoon, as Bud completed a flawless scent detection exercise, the trainer pulled Sarah aside. "Bud's exceptional," she said, her tone filled with awe. "He's not just any retired K9. He's one of the best I've ever seen. It's rare to see this level of focus and discipline in a dog who's been out of service for so long." Sarah smiled, though her heart felt heavy. She glanced at Bud, who sat patiently a few feet away, his eyes scanning the area. "Do you think he's happy?" she asked hesitantly. The trainer's expression softened. "Happiness for dogs like him comes from having a purpose. And Sarah, you're part of that purpose." That evening, Sarah sat on the living room floor beside Bud. The quiet hum of the city filtered through the windows as she stroked his fur. "You've given me so much," she said softly. "Your guidance, your loyalty, your love. I just want to make sure I'm giving you the life you deserve." Bud leaned into her touch, his warm presence a silent affirmation of their bond. Sarah thought about everything he had endured, the combat missions, the dangers he had faced, and the adjustments he had made to be her guide. He was more than just her lifeline. He was her partner, her protector, her hero. Not long after, Sarah received a call from Jake Carter, Bud's former handler. His familiar voice was a comfort, and they spoke at length about Bud's progress. When Sarah mentioned the training sessions, Jake chuckled. "That sounds like the Bravo I knew," he said warmly. "But don't forget, his biggest mission now is you. You're his family." Jake's words echoed in Sarah's mind as she reflected on Bud's journey. His life might have changed, but his purpose remained unwavering. One evening, while out for a walk, Sarah and Bud stopped at a familiar bench in the park. It was the same spot where she had first learned about Bud's past. As the cool evening breeze rustled through the trees, Sarah rested her hand on Bud's head. "You've been through so much," she murmured, her voice heavy with gratitude. "But no matter what you faced, you've always chosen to stay by my side. I'll never take that for granted." Bud leaned against her leg, his quiet strength grounding her in that moment. Sarah made a silent promise to honor Bud's past while building a future where he felt both fulfilled and loved. For her, there was no greater privilege than walking through life with a partner as extraordinary as Bud, a dog who had been a warrior, a guide, and, above all, an unwavering friend. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah knew one thing with certainty. Their story was far from over. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, their bond unbreakable and their hearts forever intertwined.